Hello and welcome to the 19th live stream of the Music Hack Space, hosted in London. And today we welcome Professor Atau Tanaka, who's in Paris today. Hello, Atau.
Hi, JB. How are you?
I'm good. I'm in lockdown, and I think you guys in Paris are almost out of the lockdown.
Yeah, the cafes are open as long as you sit outside with sufficient distance. But things are slowly coming back, and it's nice weather out there.
Great. Well, so today you're going to talk about muscle sensors and how to make music with muscle sensors. And I just want to introduce you and your background. So you were born in Tokyo, but you moved to America with your family shortly after.
That's right.
You studied biochemistry first as an undergrad student before studying music, and then going to Stanford at Karma to study computer music. You continued research at IRCAM in Paris, and then you worked at Sony CSL, also home to François Pachet's research on machine learning. And you stayed there for a number of years, and then you came back to academia, leading the Culture Lab in Newcastle. And recently, a few years ago now, you moved to Goldsmiths University to lead the Embodied AudioVisual Group. Is that a good summary?
Wow, that's the most thorough bio that I've had in a while. Yeah. The only thing is that the EV group, the Embodied Audiovisual Interaction Group, I'm not really the leader. It's a leaderless, horizontal, organic unit. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'm curious because using biosensors to make music is not something that many people do today. And I wonder how that came about for you. Was that your original studies in biology and biochemistry that inspire you to do this?
No, it wasn't my idea, actually. Perhaps the fact that I did study biosciences means that I kind of got the potential of it. And certainly, I'll get into it very briefly, but there's a real long history of using signals from the body, especially brainwave signals. There's all the kind of rage now, but we can go back to the 60s and 70s, and there were early experiments in the analog domain with taking neuron impulses as musical interfaces.
Right, that's super interesting. And could you explain what embodied audiovisual mean?
Yeah, so we were looking for a good acronym for the group, at Goldsmiths, and all the computer music labs around the world, they have lots of C's, they have lots of M's, they have lots of R's, EarCam, Karma, SARC, C4DC. And we wanted to find an acronym that didn't have any C's or M's or R's. And it was at the time, it must have been, around 2010. I sat down with my colleagues at the time, Mick Grierson, Marco Gillis, and we went to the pub next to Goldsmiths and said, we need an acronym, but we don't want any C's or R's or M's. And we were really inspired by research in human-computer interaction that was phenomenological. And in particular, a book by a researcher called Paul Dorish. It's a book about embodied interaction. And I figured, okay, that's what we do. We do forms of HCI, but with the human body, where there's a visceral corporal interaction. So there's embodied interaction in HCI, but we do music, but not just music. We do live image, we do audiovisual performance. And so that's where we cobbled together the terms embodied with audiovisual interaction. And that's how we got EV.
Right, and today it's a group with PhD students, research assistants who all have some part of their field of research touches either music or visual, VR as well, augmented reality as well.
Yeah, we're in a sort of a second generation, both in students and in researchers and academic staff. So in academic staff, we've got Michael Zabinski, who's well known in this area of Max live music performance. But we also have Sarah Wiseman, who is in HCI proper, and Helen Pritchard, who is an artist working a lot with environmental science, citizen science, and so forth. So we're expanding We're trying to redo our website, so unfortunately there's nothing, we've been hacked, there's nothing there at the moment, but hopefully during the lockdown we'll get our forces together and have a new public face.
Right. Well, thank you very much for this introduction, and I know you have prepared some materials to go through today, so I'm going to invite you to go get on with it. And people watching, please don't hesitate to ask questions, engage on the chat, just say hi. At the end of the presentation, or if Atau sees your question, he might answer them during the talk if he wants to, or we can have a Q&A session after the presentation. So I'm going to bring up your screen.
Don't share my screen yet. Yeah, it depends how long I talk. So I just wanted to get into it by saying I'm wearing the sensors already. These are picking up muscle tension, and that's been the predominant form of musical interaction that I've been using since 1990. And it's been a long time, a lot longer than these actual devices, the Mayos, existed. I won't bore you too long with it, but I will start with a couple of slides. But what we're really going to get into is to look under the bonnet, under the hood, at the max patch that I use when I perform in concert. And so what I'd like to do in today's session is share with you a little bit what I'm doing, what's going through my head and my body and computer as I perform. Some of it will touch on ways to map the electromyogram signal to sound, ways to sonify the body, and in the final stage, ways that we can start to use machine learning, neural networks, to create regression models to capture the musical gesture. So there's quite a bit to go through, but I'm going to start with just a couple of boring slides, but then we'll get right into a functional max patch and lots of show and tell with sound.
Great. Is it okay to share your screen now? All right, so over to you, and I'm going to disappear. I'll see you later.
Okay. So I've just pulled these slides up. I mean, I'm not even going to go into full screen on the PowerPoint. I do give a lecture. I have a concept of the body as a musical instrument. Okay, and there's a lot that we can say about what is the body, the human body, or bodies, social bodies, and what is an instrument, scientific instrument or musical instrument. But in this case, we're going to take a few assumptions and think about my body, the performer's body, as a performing musical instrument. Okay, and so obviously not obviously, but we can take the history in our area, music hack space, music performance with electronic music, back to the theremin, using the body to interact directly with analog electronic sound. But as I mentioned when JB was talking to me, the history of physiological signals as musical interfaces doesn't quite go back 100 years to the theremin, but does go back nearly 50 years, okay, to composers like Alvin Lucier, who did the first performances of music with brainwaves, music for solo performers. And from 1965, he's there with a headband on and electrodes and an EEG amplifier. David Rosenboom, another seminal figure from the 60s and 70s, with whom I performed last year in Stockholm at an event called Transformations. And well, if I had time, there's a lot more that I could show about this. But then from myself coming into the field, it's the Studio Stime in Amsterdam that was extremely important. And the work of Michel Weisvis. He didn't use physiological signals, but his use of the hands, his instrument that picked up movement with accelerometers, ultrasound distance sensors, mercury switches, was something that I heard as a student on CD without having the benefit of YouTube videos. And even on just a sound medium recorded album of his music, this electronic music had a kind of corporal viscerality that studio music of the time didn't. And that's really what got me into the field. So what I'm using is a physiological signal. It's a biosignal from the muscle. It's called the electromyogram. So just to show what that is, and if any of you have taken biology class where you stimulate a frog leg with a little jolt of electricity and watch it twitch. Okay? I don't know if you do that in biology class anymore. But this is the inverse. When a human muscle or when a physiological muscle tenses, it is tensing because there's an electrical communication going from the brain through the central nervous system. A little microvolt that makes the myo cells, okay, the muscle cells contract. We're able then to take the neuron impulses coming from the brain to the muscles, and by placing electrodes, okay, on the muscle, take a reading of the body's own electrical signal. That's essentially what we're doing. So this technology existed in the analog domain, okay, half century ago. So composers like Alvin Lucier and David Rosenboom could take advantage of it. The brainwave signal is very similar, okay? And today we have wireless, okay, Bluetooth devices with dry electrodes like the Myo that I'm wearing. In fact, it's a redundant device. It came into existence in 2014 and was discontinued in 2019. But I'll show a little bit what we've been working on in the lab. So there are groups of artists that have used this. I started with an instrument called the BioMuse, as I said, in 1990, invented by Ben Knapp and Hugh Lusted. That's the picture there on the upper right-hand corner. It was a full rack unit that I toured with for 15 years or so. Okay? There are other devices called the Body Synth and the IBVA. And today, so we've got the Myo, okay, that was in production for a few years. Never intended to be a musical instrument, but very, very interesting for the music community. Okay? There are products in the DIY scene, sort of like Arduinos for the body. The Plux Bitolino is a very interesting device, and we've partnered with this company before and have had students now, Will Primit, working their company in Lisbon, Portugal. So that they're a great way, if you're interested, to get into biosignals for DIY audiovisual work. And since we didn't want to be beholden to commercial products, consumer products like the Myo going out of business, etc., we've created our own board in the EV group with hardware engineer Martin Klang, who is one of the founders of the London Hackspace and the Music Hackspace. And so I might, if I have time, actually show that today. I've got it here. If I really had my act together, I'd give a performance today with this, but I'm going to stick with the Myo and I'll show what we've done with the EV board. Okay, so that's it. I mean, the next slide is me on stage. Get rid of that. But that's what I'm going to do for you here. I'm not going to be on stage performing, but I am going to call up Max, okay, and give you an idea what's going on under the hood, okay? So what you see here, and what we're going to start to do is get a sound going here. Let me just see. Okay, so I'm just going to go to step 19. Right. All right, so you see a reading, the top four, it's sort of like an oscilloscope, okay? And there are the direct readings from the electrodes. And as I tense, you see that channel 1 has got a, I can point to the screen, but the blue slider, better with the mouse, it's turned up. Now 2 have turned up. And you hear these crackly sounds. That's a direct sonification of the nervous system electrical impulses. So we're sonifying or audifying this. The second row is the right arm. So we've got this fader that's just come up. So we've got now 2 arms. Now this is all going out mono, but usually I perform this in an octaphonic sound system. Quadraphonic for the left arm, quadraphonic for the right arm. On the walls, on the side of the concert space, I've got quad on this wall for my left arm and quad along this wall vertically for my right arm. And when all 4...
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think the sound is a bit too loud, so we can't hear you very well.
Okay, all right. Here we go. I'll turn that down. How, is that better? Yeah, that's good. It is a noisy performance, and it just goes on from there. Okay. But what we're going to do, because it does get noisy and it does get overbearing. Okay. So there's only so long you can play that. But what I've got then is a piece called Myogram, okay, that will take this and start to put this through different processes. Okay. And first what we're going to do, as you can see here, is put it through a low-pass filter. So it's going to be more rumbly. So we've taken off the highs a little bit. Okay. And this, with a system that's got subwoofers, is quite powerful. Okay. And then we're going to start to then put this through different effects units. Okay. And I'm going to start to drag things onto screen. We've got an old synth that I made when I was in residency at the group Artsoid with Manuel Poletti, who's a fantastic virtuoso Max programmer. Okay, and he made this system called SCP. And here we go. What Manuel doesn't know is I've got 8 instances of SCP running, one for each EMG channel. And so you can see I've got ring mod coming in here. Okay. Got another ring mod somewhere else. I'm off screen looking for one of the 8 channels. So you can sort of hear the ring mod down. And now I've got from far away a resonator coming in. I'm going to find the resonator for you on which channel that is. There it is. Okay. Here's our resonator on EMG channel 5. So we've got a ring mod on EMG channel 2 and a resonator on EMG channel 5. So then, as the composition goes on, okay, I've got a timer here running that will change the parameters, and that's the sort of score, if you may. And you'll hear this is a whistling resonator going on. So what you're seeing are playing these resonators and modulators, okay, but with the EMG sound as the excitation. So we're able to take what's originally a very inharmonic and very noisy signal, but one that's so direct in picking up the subtleties of body movement. Okay. And turn them into musical sounds through these sort of harmonic resonators. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea. I've got a lot of windows open, so let's take away ring modulator backstage, and let's take our resonator backstage and bring back our main panel. Okay, I'm going to go back and reset that. I'm playing this completely out of order, that what I would usually do in concert. What I usually do in concert is I've got this patch with the interface to the muscle. Okay, and I've got the several pieces that I played that have been composed at different moments across these 30 years. And what's amazing with Max is a 25-year-old Max patch will basically run as long as you've followed best practice in your Max patching. And so some of these things that I'm playing are very, very old. This one, the myogram piece, is one of the more recent ones, but it's already 5 years old. Okay. All right, so I talked about the theremin as a kind of inspiration. So let's play a virtual theremin with the muscle. Okay, let's see where that would be. So that's going to be here. All right. So we've got in the green zone the raw electromyogram signal, right? And then, but we can see here more sort of classic Max sliders. If you can see dancing around here, maybe I can make that a little bit bigger. There we go. These 4 sliders, we've got now, I've reduced 4 channels on the left arm to just 2 sliders. And I'm able to take sort of oppositional muscles. A muscle on the outside, getting flex going this way, that's MUSC1, and then muscle on the inside, right? And then likewise for 3 and 4, something's not working. Okay, and this is where we're doing it. It's just sends and receives, okay, that are dynamically set up. And I made a mistake here in that arm 1 is sending 1 through 4. I'm going to turn those off here and send these channels from the right arm to muscle M3 and 4. There we go. And so now the right arm, okay, gives me this oppositional flexing, and the left arm, this one. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now let's map that to a very, very basic theremin-like sound. What number is that? So I'm going to bring this over to my secret backstage area here. And my theremin is going to be 15. So let's go to 15 here. There we go. All right. And hopefully you hear something. There we go. So you hear that one arm is doing the frequency and the other arm is doing the amplitude. And that's how a theremin works. Okay? So this is an ode to the theremin, but we're using granular synthesis. So where is that gone? All right, here we go. So this is once again SCP by Manuel Poletti, a simplified version. You see we've got these modules that are frequency shifters, ring modulators, filters, FM synthesis, samplers, distortion, etc. I'm just using the 2 voices of granular synthesis in this case. So if I click here, we can open up the granular synthesis patch. Okay. And so we've got our sound sample here coming out of a library that I've got. Same sound loaded into voice 2. Okay. And we've implemented a granular synthesizer done by an old friend from Japan, Nobuyoshi Sakonda. This is Sakonda-san's granular synthesis that's been implemented in Max. We've gone on to port this to Pure Data and run it on iOS and Android phones. So what we're going to do is now bring back our control patch. Okay. Let me, how to show you everything. Let's see, there's lower right-hand corner. All right. There we go. Okay. So we see muscle 1, muscle 2. So you see, these are my left arm sort of opposing muscles. We've got sliders 1 and 2 going. And we see that I've sort of mapped it down here to a kind of joystick like XY interface. So I can, just with 2 muscles, go around an XY space. And this is essentially giving me a pitch bend. And you see that over here in the pitch transposition figure. We're going from 3200 up to 5200. And what's nice, though, is how lively that number changes. I shake my hand and look at that. That's a kind of life that you get in a pitch value that you would never get from a pitch wheel. Yeah? And likewise, on the right arm, okay, we get the amplitude. And then with just with these 2 controls, in a very simple way, it's a little bit more than just the oscillators of a theremin, okay? But we're essentially mimicking the functionality of a theremin, but by using a granular synthesizer, okay? And as you can see, we're changing the stretch factor of the grains, etc. We're creating a very simple whistling sound, but that nonetheless has a lot of life in the sound, a lot of the life that can be articulated by the detailed and living signal coming from the body. So let me just play this for, let's see, where's my volume control? That's gone over here, yeah. So let's bring this back up, and I'll play this for a little bit for you. Okay, so that's the ode to theremin. Let's see if I can get the, there we go. But essentially that is using the muscle signal almost as a MIDI controller, and that's essentially what I've done. So this is actually the older piece. If Myogram, the sonification, is just 5 years old, gosh, this bit here, these sliders are 20-year-old sliders. And I've just changed the synth. Yeah, we must have made this synth with Manuel Poletti back in 2003 or 4. And then I made the new Myo interface about 5 years ago when the Myo came into existence. But these things are all interchangeable. I was running this patch from the old Biomuse back in the day. And it's a question of getting the mappings and scalings to work. Okay. But somehow with all this, we keep the old music going. And that's very, very important that with every change in technology, whether it's a faster computer or a new sensor, that we don't lose the old in electronic music. And especially since this is, as I said, the body as musical instrument, I don't want to throw away the instrument when there's a new one. There's all the time and the practice that it's taken. We don't throw away a saxophone or a violin. We keep it. We keep playing it. We get better and better at it. And that's very rare in electronic music, to have the time to stick with an instrument, but that's what I've tried to do with the muscle signal. Okay. All right. So let's now go into some machine learning. So since that's all the rage, let me just close down some of my windows here. Excuse me while I shut down the old, all right, 8 channels of Manuel's SCP, right, all right. And I'm going to get this back to reset. We should get back to silence, thank you. All right. Yeah, so I started looking at neural networks, well, in the early 2000s. David Wessel's group at SenMap had a very early neural network object for Macs done by Mike Lee. And I tried to get my head around it. And it took some time. And then Rebecca Febrink came out with Wekinator. And she was working in the office 2 doors down from mine. And I tried to get my head around that. And it took me quite a while to find a kind of musically meaningful application for machine learning. Maybe I'm just a bit slow. But what I wanted to find was a way to be fluid with machine learning, okay, in ways that I felt that the muscle signal allowed me to be with music. With digital music, I felt that this signal allowed me to have a kind of an analog sense. I could squeeze sound. And the first applications of machine learning are usually in classifiers. They are, okay, let's recognize this pose versus that pose. And so in using a classifier, then the output of machine learning algorithm can ultimately be quite brittle. But with neural networks and regression models, we can get not classification of identifying one thing or another, but we can create a regression map, a regression model that creates a kind of interpolation map in an information space. And this is how I'm using some of these technologies. So let me get to this piece. Okay, so now we're fast forwarding to stuff that I did in the past 6 months, and I've just started to perform with in Marseille in October, in Vancouver in November, and then since the lockdown online. So in the lab, working with Mike Zabinski, some students, Rebecca, and an European project where JB was part of it, we took some of the algorithms that Wekinator calls and made a max object out of it. Where is that max object? It's, well, it's, yeah, okay, it's hidden away in presentation mode, I think. Maybe I can find it here. Ah, there we go, recorder, rapid max, here it is, okay? So let's very quickly open this guy up. Okay, so for all the Max people out there, this is the guts that's taking left in over OSC. We're looking at the IMU of the myo, so taking quaternions. We're also taking the muscle signal, okay? But we've also got namespace for synthesizer parameters, neural network outputs, okay? Sound buffers and smoothing. So there's a kind of an OSC namespace that's sort of flat and has inputs, outputs, and the neural network in the middle, okay? And you'll start to see these different features, okay? So gesture features, we're doing feature extraction, and auditory signal metadata, okay? And we're going to create a regression model that maps one set of multi-dimensions of input, gesture input features to desired sound synthesizer parameters features. And then we'll get into audio features in the next piece. Yeah, so there's a recorder that's recording gesture in. It's just classic Max patching, creating a dictionary of that gesture data and sending that to the Rapid Max neural network and getting it at one moment to record train up a regression model and then run it. Okay, so there, I don't usually go into this level of detail, but since this is Music Hackspace, I'm sure you're fearless, or I should be fearless. Okay, there we go. So we're back though to what I look at in concert. Oops, didn't want to do that. And there we go. All right. So I'm running two of these, one for the left arm, one for the right arm. Okay, so if I open neural net 1, we've got the right arm. So we've got two neural networks, one for each arm. Okay, and I'd like to control two sounds with it. One for the left arm, one for the right arm. Okay, so there's my setup. So what are these sounds? Let's see if we can start to play them. And JB, you tell me if I'm too loud for myself. So let me see where I've gone here. Look at all these windows. All right, so I need my main controller back. I'm going to put it over here. Okay. And this is a piece called Rapid Regress. Let me call that up here. Hopefully that works. Maybe it doesn't work. Oh yeah, reset. No, that's good. Okay, handy foot pedal. Play whole. Okay. All right, so I've got two pieces of music here, as you can see, rather large buffers. The first one's an old track that I did called D-Lull, and we can hear it here. First, we're just going to play the sounds. And you hear it come in. It's just amplitude modulated by my total muscle tension. So it's a track of electronic music. There's eventually going to be beats that come in. And this is playing out of a granular synthesizer. So we'll see, we're going to start to get to different parts of the sound and make it into grains. On the right arm, yeah, so that's, on the one hand, we have an old track of mine. On the other hand, we've got good old Michel Weisvis. It's a much shorter sample, only 16 seconds long, whereas this is about 4 minutes long. Okay. So at first, the piece starts. I'm going to walk you through the performance of the piece, and that's part of what's the way I decided to work with neural networks. Is actually I start with a blank slate. I'm going to train the thing in concert, because I figured if I walk on stage with a pre-trained neural network, who's to know? You know, so part of the performance composition and the performance dramaturgy is to train up a neural network and then play with it. So the first thing I'm doing is just playing us the source materials. D-Lull, Michel Weiss. And I've got my handy foot pedal. I'm going to go to the next step. So from play whole, we're going to go to grain 1. And you sort of see what I'm doing with the sliders. Oh, hold on, to extract some of the features from the Mayo signal, okay, to simplify them. And you can sort of see controls for my synthesizer here. But what's more illustrative is, okay, what's going to happen? Okay, I think Max is, we're either in overdrive mode, yeah. Okay, but you can sort of see the feature vectors dancing around here. Okay, so I've got 19 features coming from this arm. The quaternions, about 5 of them, 8 channels of EMG, and different ways that Mike Zabinski's thought of to put them together, summing all the EMG to give us total power, and combining EMG in 2 different directions. Okay. And we've got that for the left arm, and we've got that for the right arm. So that's our input information space, 19 dimensions times 2 arms. So there's 38 dimensions. of gesture features coming in. And then in the output, there are good old familiar synthesizer parameters, okay, for granular synthesis. Speed, pitch shift, start time, duration, and then some filter, cutoff, and resonance. And so that's all in here somewhere. And so if we take this out of presentation mode, there we go, it's just, we have not used Sekonda-san's granular synthesis in this case. That was made back in Max 4 days. But since Max 4, now that we're in Max 8, the groove tilde object has been updated and is able to do stuff like time stretching. I was amazed to find that out. I'm very old school in Max. But once we found that out, we realized, okay, we want to distribute some of this stuff and make it work with vanilla objects. So we made a kind of granular synth of the sort that I like to play, that we like to play, but using stock objects like groove tilde. And then going through a couple of low res, and then our little amplitude modulator. So it's a super, super simple granular synthesizer, all being controlled by OSC messages. Okay, so let's come out of, get back into presentation mode here. Oops, let's shrink you down. There we go, that's all we need to see. Okay, and so those are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parameters, destination parameters in our synthesizer information space. So there's a 19 dimensions of gesture going to 6 dimensions, okay, of synthesis, sound synthesis parameters. And so to map those manually would be a very laborious task. And this is where the neural network can be our friend. Okay. So I've gone to this step number 2 where it's at grain 1, and suddenly you see the yellow, if you get enough detail. We're no longer playing the whole sample. We're just playing this one sort of drum thing. Okay. And then what are we playing over in Michel Weisfield's land? So I've got those 2 grains. And what I'm going to do is to find a posture for them. Okay? So let's see, make sure I'm in the camera. So what position of the body would I like to associate with, you know? So that fist is kind of cool, this one, and then maybe a palm. Okay, so I'm going to decide that those are my postures. I'm going to record this into the neural network. Okay, so I'm just trying to stay in front of the camera. Okay, I'm going to click, and you're going to see grain 1 go to, no, we need to have that window up front. Okay, ready, set, go. Okay, so it says rec 1, then grain 2. So that's just me. I just see that when I'm on stage. And I know that I've recorded those 2 gestures, and now the piece has gone to play me. I've recorded those 2 gestures, or postures, right? Let's not confuse gesture and posture. And then it's automatically gone to the next grain that I've sort of is part of my piece, my composition. And so what are those grains? It's a little bit slightly different, more hi-hat-like sound over here. And what's over here? More of a boom, 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 okay? In Michel Weisfield's land. So we're going to pick 2 postures, okay, for this. So whereas before I was like that, let's now go. Now I'm going to go fist with Michel and palm. Okay. And then I'm going to go on my foot switch. Yeah. Did it do it? No. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it did it. And you'll hear we keep going back to. So this is Michel now, 3rd grain. Let's point. And let's go to something. Okay. Foot. Okay. And then finally a 4th grain. Let's do something like this. Okay. And going to capture those gestures. Okay. Now, it says record just posture 4 and then train the neural network. So live, while I've been doing that, both regression models have been trained. And now you'll see in the interface a much smoother. We're no longer playing single grains. Okay. So let me just lower the volume so I explain a little bit. So we've taken those 4 sets of postures, you know, the fist, the palm, the fist, this sort of, and then the, okay. Those are our anchor points in our regression space. But then we've trained up the regression model, okay, to associate 19 dimensions of gesture input with 6 dimensions of synthesis output across that whole information space using those 4 postures, those 4 examples that we've given it as reference points. And I call those anchor points. And then once it's trained up, now we're running the neural network. And so you'll see these multi-sliders going live. So if I hit a good old you might sort of hear, I wasn't too careful in doing this, but if I'm really concentrating on stage, I can get back to the original grain, okay, when I hit the right posture. But then I'm sort of surfing around an interpolation space that I never could have created by hand. And then on the right arm, Michel Weissfist. So let's play that a little bit. Okay, so, hold on, let me get that shut up. So that was my sort of first piece where I finally felt like a neural network was my friend on stage. And it really had to be, because I'm starting off with 2 neural networks that are empty, and I fill it as part of the performance. And it's still, yeah, so it allowed me to be quite expressive, to be spontaneous. These were qualities that were really important to me. And still to create stuff that was exploratory, but didn't sound random. And to find that balance was really, really difficult. All right, so I'm going to finish by playing one more example, which is another neural network experiment. This was one that I just performed. It was a commission for the Albany Theatre. Just went live on Saturday last week. It was supposed to be live in the Albany Theatre in Deptford itself. But unfortunately, with the pandemic, we had to change tact, and it's now on YouTube 360 as a 360-degree video. It's a collaboration with the visual artist Uta Kugelsberger, where we'd been working on a project called The Orchestra of Rocks. Let me see if I can find, yeah. And this is a project that was very physical at the beginning. You see these blue rock sculptures. Each of these blue rock sculptures has a Genelec speaker in it. So, let's see. Can we get, yeah. And so we're creating spatial sound, okay, in space. It's not surround sound like in the cinema, but there are 8 rocks, 8 channels of Genelec with playing water dripping sounds recorded in a lake in the Peak District that Uta recorded, that we would then remix. We worked with beatboxers as well, and so you see some dancing around. So this was the original project that we had to, there's Adam Parkinson remixing, that we were commissioned by the Albany Theatre and the group Call and Response, Tom Slater, a studio for immersive sound, to create a 3D immersive version. So we modeled these rocks in 3D, and we were going to perform with them on our Sonics Immersive Media Lab surround projection system until COVID came. So we took the 3D model of the rock and made a 360-degree video, which you will see here. It's on this playlist if you search for Array Music Festival for last Saturday. So this is fresh stuff. We're third on the playlist there. And it's a video that you can click and swerve around in 360. But you will basically see a dialogue between me performing on the muscle system and this 3D modeled rock that's audio reactive. And it's a dialogue then between a human body and a rock body. Okay? But I'm going to show you the max patch that went into making the sounds for that. And it's called Rock Learn. I hope this will work. Let's go back to the reset here. Okay. All right, so this should now be playing very quietly. So I've turned up max, but you should still be able to hear my voice. Hopefully there's enough rock. Yeah. So let me talk through a little bit what this is doing. Let's open that up. So we've done a seek 0, so that's the first grain that we want to play. This is not quite granular synthesis, it's a little bit more advanced. We're using concatenative synthesis based on corpus, sound corpus, better known in this implementation as Earcam's Cat Art by Demo Schwartz. Okay, so there is the beast. We've got now our very familiar 19 dimensions of gesture input. Okay, I'm just taking the right arm in this case. And the left arm is doing something else. Okay, and we actually in this case now have 19 dimensions of sound. And they're not just synthesizer parameters, they're auditory features. Okay, so they're auditory metadata by which we're able to search a corpus of sound grains, sound units. So these features are duration, frequency mean and standard deviation, energy mean and standard deviation, periodicity, okay, loudness, spectral centroid, okay, spectral spread, skewness, and a feature called kurtosis. Right? And so to compose a piece like this, I would go and use Earcam's Mubu, okay, and I will open up my database. And here is a recording, and this is Uta's original recording from the cave in the Peak District, a series of water dripping in a very reverberant space. Okay, so that's in a multimodal buffer, MUBU, and we're going to analyze it before the piece starts. Okay, through different forms of segmentation. We're doing onset detection. Okay, we can. If I remember find out where the parameters are. Well, that's right. But anyway, all those, the red is actually vertical lines that sliced and diced the original recording into small grains based on onset. Okay, and it will have analyzed them according to these 19 parameters and created a 19-dimensional information space, auditory information space. Right? So we can listen to them. I can't get to that bottom part of my window. I'll do that. There we go. Yeah, so if I play back in order, you see so you sort of see the data index go by, and so we're just playing through all the grains in linear order. Okay, so this few minutes of audio have been divided up into thousands of grains like this. We're just hearing the first 200. Okay, but you hear some dripping and so forth. So we'll stop that. Okay. And let me go back to, now I've sort of probably messed this up, but let's go to step 2 again. Okay. So we're starting, I've chosen, data index 1. I hope that's the right one. Okay, turn the volume on. Yeah, you hear a sort of background waters puddle. Okay. So what we've done, we've got one single neural network now. We've got cat art with its 19 dimensions of auditory feature. I'm using the poly multi-channel MC objects and put the cat art implementation in there. So we've actually got 8 channels of cat art. So imagine that, 8 EMG channels, 8 cat art channels. How lovely is that? So I can now open, this is just one of them. So each of the 8 cat arts is identified with a unique identifier. So we're able to get to 19 dimensions of feature for each of the 8 voices and control basic synthesizer playback such as attack, release, and filter frequency. That's what I'm doing with my other arm. Okay, so imagine having 8 of these. Okay, they're all, in fact, yeah, you can see them here. That's number 2, there's number 1, and we'll see all this will come to life, hopefully, if I can stop talking. All right. So let's see. Let's see what the first step is here. Here we go. Where's my piece? So that's the synthesizer. I'm looking for the composition. Rocklearn. Oh, there's composition there. Just as these are all, they're full of messages that send, that set up the synth, etc. Okay. So I'm going to probably train up a posture on that first sound. So that's quite quiet. And mute my volume control. Okay. So I'm going to train it on this position. Okay. So you see it says record 0. That's all it's done. It's captured that. There's a lot of clicking. Okay, so now I have to turn the volume down so you can hear me. Now you've seen that it gone to seek 1. It's gone to the second grain, and now you see the VU meters of the 8 channels starting to dance. And so the next thing I'm going to do is find another posture and train on that, or record the posture associated with that. And likewise the next. So you see a pattern here. I've got fairly static sound anchor points that I like to, that are the sort of reference points of my composition, that I sort of flip through at the beginning of the piece to get people familiar with the sound materials and to start to set up a gestural language in the abstract through postures. But by here, my left arm is active, and you'll see it says amplitude modulation. So this gives me a little bit of non-neural network direct sort of articulation of the sound. So now what we've done, whereas in the first piece I set up 4 anchor points, 4 poses, and then finally trained it and sort of jammed on it. In this piece, we're just taking a couple of anchor points at a time and training the neural network. Okay, so I've just taken those first 2 poses and I've trained it. So that's the first. Okay. There's a second. So I can fairly reliably get. But already I'm in an infinite space of interpolation. And it's not just interpolating between these 2 positions, these 2 sounds. If I do things outside of the postures that I've recorded in, I start to get subtle differences in the sound. So this is a neural network just trained on 2 associations between posture and auditory features, albeit 19 dimensions of each. Okay, but this is just the beginning of the piece. Okay, so let's go to the next. Oh, it says seek 3 amplitude modulation individual. So it's seeking to the 3rd grain that I've chosen. Okay, so that's a slightly noisier one. And I've got individual amplitude modulation. So each of the 8 channels is amplitude modulated by one of the 8 EMG channels. So the 8 channels, 8 voices of cat art are amplitude modulated by one of the 8 EMG channels. And you can imagine this in a multi-channel sound system. So I ask for 8 channels usually, coming out of different speakers. Spatial. Okay, but that's just the sound. Okay, we're going to need to train. We're going to need to record the posture associated with this. So maybe this requires. So now you see in the status window it says record, train, play. Okay, and then period individual. I recorded that gesture and then I trained the neural network and now it's running. And so if you remember before we had 2 postures and 2 sounds. Now we've added the 3rd grain and added a 3rd anchor posture. Okay, so the fact that we can add to a neural network's training data okay, is this whole workflow that we call interactive machine learning. And this is what Rebecca Feebrink really made available to musicians with Wekinator. And now we've put that into a Max object. And the fact that you can edit the training data, add to your training set as you go, is this whole paradigm of interactive machine learning. And in essence, I'm doing it as part of the performance. I had 2, and now I've got 3. And so the neural network, the regression model, is growing. So the timbral space becomes richer. But let's keep going here. Oh, seek 4. So there's something else. Okay, there's some really intense things. I got to think of the gesture. And then, as you might imagine, the next foot pedal switch will capture that. Okay, so that you sort of get it. That ended up being a little bit random because I wasn't very good about remembering what postures I hit. And also I was sitting down and standing up. So actually I was sort of sending messy data to the neural network. So kaka in, kaka out is no matter how sophisticated the system gets. But you sort of get the idea of, in this case, interactive machine learning successively adding to the training set to get a richer timbral space and performing with it. And that whole trajectory and development being the dramaturgy of the piece in concert, starting with a blank slate and ending up with a very, very rich information space. So that's it. I had mentioned that this can all be done with a Bitolino because the Mayo is not available anymore, or Martin Klang's our Eevee board. This is what it looks like. I will be moving towards this soon, but as you can imagine, yeah, it's a little bit messier. You have to put gel electrodes on. It does become more like real medical gear. And so if you know artists like Stellark and you want to be in Stellark's band, you might do something like this. But with Federico Visi, we have started to use it. And so this board was used in an exhibition and performance for the first time by a band called Chicks on Speed. And with Alex Murray Leslie, Melissa Logan. It's currently running or just finishing up a 6-month run in Switzerland at a museum called SUSCH, S-U-S-C-H. And so here there's a Vimeo video of the performance. There's Federico there and Melissa and Alex. And if you get to the detail of some of the pictures, they actually had, Federico was wearing a maillot, but there are these, our EMG boards there in Alex's headgear and Melissa's, yeah, somewhere. There's other photos. Let's see. Okay, so this is the exhibition itself, a retrospective, in fact, to a 60s artist who looked a lot at the human body, Carolee Schneemann, and her partner, James Tenney, the electroacoustic music composer, and they worked together on a project called Noise Bodies. So once again, ways that experiments in the 60s with the body and electronic sound are really at the heart of this work today with physiological signals, not just in what I'm doing, but other artists like Federico Visi and Alex and Melissa from Chicks on Speed are doing as well. So that gives us sort of an idea of what I've been up to with the muscle interaction, the human body as musical instrument. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Atau. We have time for a few questions, if you have time for them.
Sure.
This was really fascinating stuff, and I'll leave some time for people to ask some question on YouTube or on Facebook or on Twitch, where we can see the comments that you post. And in the meantime, I do have some of my own. And first, there was a term that you explained, but it was a recurring term that probably needs just one bit more of explanation, which is the regression model. It's kind of a barbaric word, but it means something very specific in machine learning. And I'd love for you to explain once more what a regression model means.
Yeah, regression. God, yeah. I mean, in the tech world, we use such scary words innocently. Even something like MIDI controller. These days, back in the day, it just seemed, oh, I just want a MIDI controller. But I really got suspicious of the word control after a while. And yeah, a word like regression is even worse. What are we regressing into? Especially with world politics these days. I feel like the 21st century is a century of regression. But it's not regressing as in going back. Okay, so regression in politics seems to be going back. But regression in machine learning is to map across from one mode of information to another mode of information. And so we're creating a model in this case that's taking gesture as the input modality and sound as the output modality. Okay? And it will look at points that are associations of one and the other. So I gave examples of, okay, this pose will be this set of synthesis parameters or this set of auditory features. And I like to call these anchor points. By giving enough examples that are anchor points, it creates a regression model. It regresses all the other possibilities in between.
Right, so it is a reduction of a data set into smaller numbers of, or mapped onto smaller numbers of parameters. Is that correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's a mapping. And so this is where the neural network itself, you can explain it as a mapping, you can explain it as a kind of interpolation, but it's not like any kind of hardwired interpolation that you would do. A neural network has an input layer and an output layer. That's what I've just described, gesture in, sound out. But the way that it works is with what are called hidden layers. And they're hidden, so we don't have to worry about them. But that's where weights of things coming in, okay, are automatically calculated by the algorithm to get to what's coming out. There's regression because you've got there's back propagation, etc. You start with what you end up with and work backwards. There's regression in that sense to come up with weights for the nodes in the hidden layer. And so all that it's called a neural network because it's inspired by the nervous system, okay, of the human brain, of multiple connections in a rhizomatic way, and weights in those connections, so that then any new information coming in will find its way to a set of output parameters.
Right. And this is quite fascinating, the fact that you could train a model in a live performance context, and the successive gesture that you would record, that there would be an interpolation space in between, where gestures in between would be, tapping into each of these defined gestures and on a scale. So if you slide from one gesture to the next, you would draw onto these different parameters, and that brings about a lot of possibilities for live performance, of course, but also for people with idiosyncratic range of movements. If someone has a disability or can move less part of their bodies, that model could completely adapt to anyone in particular's range of movements.
That's right, and that's the power of it. Is that, yes, previously, well, we do have max objects to kind of massage our data. We've got the scale object to bring things within range, and then as an argument to the scale object, we've got the sort of the exponential, the curve parameter, which then can set the curve to be more logarithmic or more exponential, and so forth. And in those ways, we can massage the mapping of one data point, one data stream coming into another data stream going out. Okay. And as you said, yeah, depending on the abilities or the specificities of a user, we might want to scale or set up mapping curves, okay, to adapt to them. And indeed, the power of something like machine learning is by just, to hand do a mapping curve. You sit there saying, okay, well, is it 1.01? I'm sure some people that have sat with the scale object have said, is it 1.03? Oh, okay, do we want to go on a dB scale, etc.? And you're trying to do these maths in your head and doing trial and error. But with a neural network, you let the neural network do the trial and error for you, and you just give it a couple of reference points, okay, and it does the rest. It's not as miraculous as that. You do have to kind of trust it. Or as I said, caca in, caca out. You've got to give it good data, okay? Or with the interactive machine learning paradigm, you can, if you don't like what you get out, you can edit the training set, okay? And I think this is a really important thing that allows us a little bit of the care, and musicians care, to get it right, to tweak it, to get it to just feel just right. And in data science, this sort of care and editing and thinking about the training data is something that's quite unusual for data science as a whole. In data science, they say, just give it more data, deep learning, big data, and it'll figure it out. Oh, some of the data won't be needed, but it's okay, just throw it in there. There's some truth to that. The algorithms are quite miraculous, but I do think that if you care about what you put in, then you will get out something that is much closer to what your objective is.
And also, I suppose it would be analyzed faster as well, because deep learning takes a lot of time to process, whereas the model that you use is more shallow in terms of...
That's right. So we're getting to states where a lot of the excitement is in the deep learning area where you need big data sets. But then you need lots of data to have big data sets. And so then you start to rely on companies like Google that have been collecting data from people, whether they know it or not. Now, if I start out with a neural network that's a blank slate at the beginning of the concert, and 10 minutes later, I've trained it up with a half dozen postures, that's not big data. That's very, very small data. And so there's another kind of philosophical way of approaching machine learning for me. Okay, it's only my data. It's my data from this one performance. It's the same piece, but the next time I do the piece, if it's in a different concert hall, if there's a different energy, the way I do the gestures will be different. I don't want to automatically have to inherit a data set from another performance, in one environment to go to another. So that's, we work with small data. I think that's, but to try to get small data to be expressive, and this is becoming more and more an issue. Big data, where does it come from? What are the built-in biases to big data? And we've had these problems that machine learning algorithm with big data can inadvertently be doing racial profiling because of the way it's been constituted, because of the human labeling, okay, that may have gone in at some stage. So it's not just a black box. Humans have operated on this, and they will carry along biases. If you take someone else's data set, you have no control over what biases might have gone in to that data. And so working with your own data is the only sure way. And Adrian Fried from CENMAT just said this on Facebook, is the only ethical way to work with data sets is if the data is your own. And in this case, the data is my own body.
Yes, I did see that from Adrian, and he had a very responsible approach to this. We have a question from Dominique BB here that I'm going to bring up on Facebook. Thank you, Dominique, for asking this question. It's a two-part question. So in the interpolation space, you define it by anchor points and then move surf, like you said. How much freedom is there to improvise in this space with a live neural net?
Yeah, fantastic. No, it's a very good question, and thanks, Dominique. Dominique is a dancer working with interactive systems in choreographed and improvised body movement. So I understand her interest. Indeed, yeah, I've coined the term anchor points as a way to give the references, to train the neural network. So they are points in an information space, but then once it runs, it is way beyond interpolation. Interpolation is the simplest way to describe it, but once it runs the whole regression model, you have access to the whole information space with any data coming in. So if I said 19 dimensions from gesture going to 19 dimensions of auditory feature, I give a few reference points, like this posture, these sounds, but once it's trained and running, we're completely free to explore that space. So one way that I've really thought to configure these technologies is to allow a completely sort of exploratory mode of navigation in the information space.
Right.
There was a question about spectrum, I thought, too.
Yes. I was wondering if it was so related that you actually answered.
Spectrum between, or they totally different to them. Well, there's inputs and there are outputs, and then there are these hidden layers that we don't have to worry about. So for us, I author a sound. I get a sound that I like, and I say, well, what body position would I like to associate with that sound? And iterate that a few times. That's what we saw in the pieces. Those are the examples of association between posture input and sound output that the system uses. And once it's trained up and running, then anything coming in, the neural network will find the supposed corresponding sound coming out.
Right. So thank you, Dominique, for this question. I have questions on different aspects of the work you presented. One of them is a minor technical point, and by the way, I asked the question whether you should be more fearless or less fearless in your diving into details, and then people responded more. So people want more details about everything. So one of my questions is about latency, and it's hard to tell on the live stream whether there is any latency because there's the added latency of the system itself. But how do you deal with that, and how is the latency? It seems fast, but how does it feel?
Yeah. Well, latency is hugely important for me, and I think time sink and latency issues are concerns that are very rapidly being lost. I sort of assume and hope that StreamYard is, keeping the image and the sound synced at the very least. So there's two things. There is sync between media, and there's the delay. And first of all, I'm a real stickler for solid sync between what you see and what you hear. And back in the day, there was the group Granular Synthesis. There was a group called Granular Synthesis, Kurt Henschlager and Ulf Langheinrich, that played with massive video projection systems on analog systems. But they had a one-frame delay in their system, and I noticed it because it has to do with really incredibly, jerky movements of the body. And so, yes, one-frame delay you can pick up. And so then in terms of latency, especially if there's a delay between an action that's coming from the body, like a gesture, and the sound that comes out, you just feel it, and you start to get sluggish, because if there's a delay, then we're good at starting to compensate for delay. But the more you compensate, the more it delays, and there can be kind of a downward spiral. As musicians, we're very good at compensating for this stuff and still being snappy and live. There are some instruments, like low frequency instruments, the tuba, it's a lot slower than the trumpet to articulate a sound. You say, and the trumpet goes right away, but a tuba goes. But a tuba player knows to anticipate when to start blowing so that the swell in his sound is in time with the conductor.
Right.
An organ, similarly, speaks, you play on the keyboard, but then it comes out of pipes that are tens of meters away. So there's a delay. So that those kinds of latencies musicians can deal with. But then latencies in technological systems, either we have to start to work like tuba players and organists, but if it goes, network delay that's where you can get into the downward spiral. There's a delay going out, someone delays coming back, I try to sync with them coming back, and then so I'm slower, there's a delay, and that's where the downward spiral starts to start. And that's, by the way, why I'm not wearing headphones. I hope there isn't feedback, but even in this system, there's like a 50 millisecond delay in what I hear of my own voice, and I just can't, it makes me speak slower if I do that. And if I put my headphones on Bluetooth, God forbid, these are really fast aptX codecs, but there's still, the latency is not zero. And so, these things in some ways are getting worse with technology.
Yes, and it's certainly a subject of improvement every day, and in particular in this context of COVID and lockdown, where musicians are still wanting to practice and rehearse and collaborate, and there's still no good solution to performing or rehearsing remotely. So,
well, that being said, there are some very interesting low latency solutions for network music, but I did a bunch of network music in the early 2000s before we had super fast networks, and I thought, well, why try to fix it? So I have embraced latency also. Yes, with COVID, maybe we have to do more performances over the net, and we would like to do the music we used to do. But maybe the network changes the music that we do, and that there is a music for the network that embraces the temporal affordances and the temporal characteristics of the network. And I spoke about this a while back, saying, well, acoustic properties of concert halls, we adapt to them, a reverberant hall, a less reverberant hall. We think of it as resonant qualities of a space. Well, the network is a space. And if there's a bit of latency going from point A to point B on the internet, maybe that is a kind of a resonant acoustic of the network. And so I've thought about these in terms of network acoustics.
Right, yeah. That's very interesting. Adrian has joined us. Hello, Adrian. And he comments that analog neural networks and sensors mitigate latency.
Oh, goodness. Adrian has tuned in. Good thing I cited you on your Facebook post about the ethics of your own data.
You did acknowledge that.
That's great. Yeah, well, analog neural networks may mitigate latency. Yeah. Adrian, is this to do with analog computing? Gosh, you'll know more about that than me.
Well, we can have another question in the meantime. Atau is also checking something.
Sorry, I think I'm going to have to wrap up soon. It's getting on 8 o'clock London time, but yeah. So, certainly. Well, there are all sorts of new sort of paradigms of computing, analog computing, quantum computing, which may indeed have very, very different temporal affordances. Adrian will certainly know a lot more about it than me, but I think it's very interesting that the very first neural network object that I tried to use came from the studio where Adrian worked. Yeah.
Indeed, Adrian worked at the CNMAT in Berkeley, and we are hoping to have him join very soon. In fact, on this live stream. So
he's doing some great work with custom signal processing chips. So indeed, by getting to the heart of the matter, we may get closer in the kind of responsiveness of systems that are dear to us as musicians.
Right. So if it's possible to answer two last questions.
Sure.
The first one is going to
A
be
couple
pretty
minutes,
quick, and I'll post it. I'll post the answer as well. So on YouTube, Steph Wild is asking, what system did you use to train the neural network live?
Yes. So as I mentioned, what we've done is to port the algorithms that Rebecca Fiebrink's Wekinator are calling. Okay, a sort of multi-layer perceptron neural network. We've also got k-nearest neighbors classifiers running. We're working on the dynamic time warping, and we've wrapped them in a max object. And so it's an object called Rapid Max, and it will be on a GitHub or GitLab repository that we can get to through Michael Zabinski. I will post that on somewhere. We just presented this at the CMMR conference in Marseille back in October. I performed with it, and there's a book chapter being written up, and we've made all the patches and code available on a repository. So anyone that saw that performance or read that paper or came to the conference presentation will be able to reproduce what we did. So yeah, we're making that available. So keep an eye out for Rapid Max. But then if you want to get your feet wet, download Wekinator, wekinator.org. And there's a really nice cadenza course that Rebecca gives, machine learning for musicians and artists.
Right, and our last question is from Nella. Is it possible to give machine learning algorithm real-time input or needs to be a prepared data set? A sound recording already recorded?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So how do you train the neural network? Now, I was training it live, in my performance. I mean, I was kind of explaining it and then hitting the button and showing you. But when I perform, I'm not showing everyone my max patch. I'm not talking over it. These are musical works. So in that sense, I am training them in real time. That being said, they are static postures that I'm training them with. Okay, and that's why I call them anchor points. But you can give machine learning algorithms continuous data as well. There are algorithms for temporal modeling. Hidden Markov models are one. Okay, dynamic time warping, you can send it continuous data, and then once trained, you can send it another bit of continuous data, and it starts to give you the distance between the Euclidean distance between the example and the test input. But this is the very point at which I kind of got stuck, though, and that's why Nella's question is a good one. When I first tried to use Mike Lee's neural network object, I wanted to recognize gestures, and as a musician, I just wanted to do this gesture, do that gesture, and say, okay, classify or what have you. But in music, our gestures are not so clean. We're probably finishing one gesture as we start another gesture, or we might be doing two gestures almost in parallel. So there are questions of segmentation. How do you tell an algorithm when you've started a gesture, and how do you tell it when your gesture is over so that it knows the unit to think about as the example? So there are many strategies to this, and these are in fact some interesting research challenges where I think music as an application case once again give challenges that traditional data scientists might not think about.
Right. Okay, well, that leads us to the end of this. I saw a comment here by Zach referring to David Wessel, with who Adrian Fried
Konate,
worked.
Zach Settle's tuned in, yeah. This is always ode to David Wessel, and in fact his timbre space work is a real seminal point in this. And it is David Wessel who encouraged Mike Lee to create the first neural network object. And so, Wessel was someone who set up SENMAT, but who also performed with controllers like the Buchla Thunder, where the squishiness of interaction, the continuity of it, and the sort of continuous exploration through timbre space was very, very important. And so, all of us, Adrian, Zach, myself, owe a lot to the late David Wessel.
Yeah, David was the director of the CNMAT in Berkeley, north of San Francisco, and he left us a few years ago, but has a huge literature to his credit and a lot of research, including some that he did in Paris in IRCAM, I believe, prior to.
Well, he started the Small Systems Computer Group at IRCAM back when IRCAM was on mainframe computers, and he negotiated a donation from Apple for a bunch of Mac 2s at the time. This is late 80s. And the story as it goes, well, Zach will know the story better than me because he was there. And this is what got Miller Puckett working on Patcher at the beginning. But it almost didn't happen because the Apple truck pulled up and was about to unload the Apple IIs, and the IRCAM officials were about to refuse the donation out of an idea that big computers were going to be better than small computers. But David was a champion of small computer systems. This was the time also when the trombonist and composer George Lewis was at IRCAM, and he himself went on to create great software like Voyager running on small computers like the Atari.
Right. Well, I mean, I could reminisce forever about this, and we have more comments coming from Adrian Fried, and you can find the link on Facebook if you want to go back to the Music Hackspace page there and see more of the history that Adrian is posting about. I want to thank you, Atau, for this wonderful presentation and deep dive into your practice. I think that we had in the past few weeks, we had instrument inventors, and you're no exception to it. You're also an instrument inventor, albeit that the instrument is for your own practice and research, as opposed to being something that is delivered to other people to use. But I could imagine that if it was...
I don't invent anything. I have not invented any of these things. I'm just the piano player. So don't shoot me. I'm the piano player. I just make some tunes with the stuff. Right. But I hope we've got the chat archived because Adrian has sent up some really good links.
Yes, it is archived. I mean, this will be available on the Facebook recording. All these talks are recorded as well and available on YouTube and at Facebook as well, with the transcript, which should appear if you're not a native English speaker like myself. You can have the subtitles of what we say.
Fantastic.
So let me thank you again, Atau. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Adrian, Nella, Zach, and everyone else who took the time to comment and ask questions. You are making this much more interesting and lively. We will be back not this Monday, but Thursday next week. And we have a lot of workshops on Macs, by the way. So please check out our program of workshops at Macs, but also Tidal Cycles, which is going to be next weekend. And we have a couple of Tidal Cycles workshops. So thank you again, Atau.
Well, thanks, JB. Yeah, it was real fun. Great.
All right.
Goodbye. See you, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.